Hi, I'm Chip, and every now and then as a service technician I come into some unusual problems of washers and dryers, and I was thinking about making a playlist that would cover these, and this would be the first in that series. Today I'm going to cover two problems that I've found recently, one on a washer, one on a dryer, that you as a service technician or even as a do-it-yourselfer may encounter someday. So let's get to it. So this customer brings me his machine saying that it's leaking water on his floor. I asked him if it was rusty looking, and he says he thought it may be. And while we're unloading it from his truck, I tip it up and I see the characteristic rusty marks on the rotor. And yeah, you need a new bearing shaft and seal kit, I told him. And I show him where the rusty water's been leaking out of the tub. So I order the parts, and when they come in I do a routine repair that I've done a dozen times before, and I clean his machine up. I make out a bill, and now I usually always run a test load of clothes through every machine that I repair to ensure that it's returned to the customer in working condition. But this day I didn't. It was cold, it was raining, and my test area for washers is outside. The concrete was wet, and in my defense, had I even done this, I couldn't have told if the machine was leaking or if it was the bad weather making the water on the concrete. Anyway, I called the guy up, and he comes after hours. He didn't get off work until late, and I meet him at the shop, and I get paid, and I help him load up his washer. And later that evening the phone rings, and it's him again. He says, "Hey, this thing's still leaking." Now this kind of puzzles me because I was really careful putting that new seal in, and I was sure it couldn't be my repair, so I suspected that it might be his drain line that was backing up. But he assured me that he checked that, and it's coming from inside the washer cabinet, he says. So I feel kind of bad about not testing it, and I tell him I'll come to his house and pick it up and find out what's going on the next day. So bright and early I drive 30 or so miles to his house. I pick up the washer and I zip back to the shop, and once I get it on the test rack, sure enough there's water dripping out from under it, and when I start a load of clothes in it. So on this particular washer, I think it was a Kenmore Elite, there's a cover plate on the back of the cabinet, and when I removed that, this is what I found. Now, I don't know why this tub cracked right here, but sure enough there's a hole in the tub, and that hole was just in the right spot to sling water out when the tub was turning while the washer was filling. So I cut a patch from a junked out tub I had on the boneyard, and using some plastic welding rod that Mr. Harper had gotten from somebody he knew in the pipeline business, I used this welding rod and a propane torch, and I put a patch on the tub that fixed the problem. And this also taught me a valuable lesson to always test your work before you send it back to the customer. I should have known this because I've done the same thing in the past, sent something out before I tested it, and it always comes back to me. Now, in this next problem, it was a puzzle to me. A customer called me late in the day and said that his dryer wouldn't turn off, and it would heat and it worked just fine, but it just would not turn off. So I questioned him about whether the timer dial moved, and after he asked his wife, she told him that no, it just stayed where she started the cycle and it never cut off. I say to myself, that's a bad timer motor. And anyway, I make an appointment with him for the next day, and I show up with a rebuilt timer, and I take my putty knife, I depress the clips on the console on both sides, and lay the console down, and I remove the screws from the back panel there, and I reached underneath and I press the start button, and I watched for the little indicator wheel on the back of the timer to turn. Well, it didn't turn, so I figured it's a timer, so I replaced the timer. I selected the time dial on this, and I selected high heat and I pushed the start button. I watched that timer win, and sure enough the little wheel was spinning, and so the problem solved. So I put the console back, placed it back on the thing, whip out my phone, pull up QuickBooks and make out a receipt, collect my money, head back to the shop. About 2 hours later the guy calls me back and he says, "Hey, this thing's still doing the same thing." Well, now I'm kind of scratching my head because I know that timer was working when I left there. And so I go over everything that could cause this in my mind, and I am thoroughly puzzled. So now this time when I go in, I notice that the lady always used the left side of her dryer's timer settings, and the one you know, the ones that say auto dry. So I tested it on the time dry. I popped off the console again and I hit the start button, and the indicator wheel, it just sits there. I say, and then I turn the timer to the time dry side and I hit the start button, and it's working. Right in front of me is the wiring schematics that are folded up and they're taped to the console. So I unfold the diagram and I start to puzzle this out. And I'm wondering why this timer will work on the right hand side, but it won't work on the left. So what's the difference between time dry and auto dry? And right there on that schematic is the answer. That orange wire that goes to the high-end thermostat, and that energizes the timer on the auto dry cycles. And so I lay the dryer down and I remove the back cover, and sure enough, the orange wire had come loose from that high limit thermostat. That's the only thing that was wrong with that dryer. I used some needle nose pliers and I tightened up the little spade connector and I put everything back together. And when I tested the timer again, the little indicator wheel still wasn't moving. But as I looked back at the schematic, I was kind of scratching my head, and then I noticed that it would cycle on and off with the element. And sure enough, when the cycle triggered, that little wheel started spinning. So I still had the old timer, and I replaced it with the one that I put on there and checked everything. I refunded the cost of the timer, and I only charged the guy for the original service call. But now I know what that orange wire does on the high limit thermostat. And I always knew it went back to the timer, but I never realized that it energized the timer motor for the entire left-hand side of the hemisphere of the dryer. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this little video, and thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.